1885. A Victorian photograph. A young boy in a wool suit sitting beside his little sister in a white lace dress. He's holding her hand protectively, looking at the camera with an expression families called proper. She sits perfectly still, eyes gently closed, head tilted slightly, like she's resting. For 138 years, this photo sat in archives labeled Adorable Victorian Siblings. Sweet, innocent, charming. Until a museum curator in 2023 scanned it at 20,000 dpi and noticed something in the shadows behind them. Something painted over. Something hidden beneath the girl's dress. Something that explained why she never moved during the long exposure. Why her skin looked different. Why the boy was crying. Because this wasn't what anyone thought it was. The photograph appeared on an online estate auction in March 2023, listed simply as Victorian Children Portrait, circa 1885, Boston area. The image showed two children posed in a formal studio setting. A boy, approximately 7 years old, wearing a dark wool suit with knee breeches and a white collar. Beside him sat a younger girl, perhaps 4, in an elaborate white dress with lace trim, ribbons in her curls, and a small bouquet of flowers pinned to her chest. What made the photograph appealing to collectors was its apparent tenderness. The boy held the girl's hand gently but firmly, his fingers wrapped around hers. His expression was solemn, typical for Victorian portraits where subjects were instructed not to smile, but there was something in his eyes that seemed protective, almost fierce. The girl appeared serene. Her eyes were closed, her head tilted slightly toward her brother, her expression peaceful. The photograph sold for $140 to the Boston Museum of Vernacular Photography, a small institution specializing in 19th century everyday imagery. Dr. Eleanor Graves, the museum's chief curator, added it to a collection of Victorian family portraits scheduled for digital preservation. When I first examined it physically, I thought it was charming, Dr. Graves recalled. A protective older brother with his shy little sister. The kind of image that makes you think about family bonds across generations. The photograph measured 6 by 9 inches, printed on thick cardstock typical of cabinet cards, the standard format for professional portraits in the 1880s. The back of the card showed a photographer's mark, heavily faded but still partially legible. Mitchell Portrait Studio, Boston, Esterton, 1878. Dr. Graves began the standard digitization process in April 2023, using a specialized scanner capable of capturing images at extremely high resolution, 20,000 dpi, far beyond what's visible to the human eye. High-resolution scanning often reveals details completely invisible in physical examination, Dr. Graves explained. Wear patterns, retouching, damage, sometimes even pencil notations on the surface that have faded to invisibility. The initial scan appeared normal, but when Dr. Graves began digital restoration, correcting fading, adjusting contrast, removing age spots, something unexpected appeared. First, she noticed the lighting was inconsistent. The boy was illuminated from the left side, creating natural shadows on his right side. But the girl showed almost no shadow definition at all. Her face appeared oddly flat, as if light was hitting her from all directions simultaneously. Second, the boy's cheeks showed faint vertical streaks running from his eyes downward. At first, Dr. Graves assumed this was water damage or emulsion deterioration, but the pattern was too symmetrical, too organic. Third, when she enhanced the contrast in the background area behind the children, a faint vertical line appeared behind the girl's back, something that shouldn't be visible in a normal studio portrait backdrop. I started feeling uneasy, Dr. Graves said. Small details that individually meant nothing, but together suggested something was wrong with this photograph. She decided to apply spectral imaging, a technique that uses different light wavelengths to reveal layers of paint, retouching, and alterations invisible under normal light. What appeared on her screen made her stomach drop. Beneath the surface of the photograph, hidden by 138 years of careful painting and retouching, was evidence that this wasn't a normal family portrait at all. And the little girl wasn't what anyone had assumed. Spectral imaging works by photographing an object under different wavelengths of light, ultraviolet, infrared, and various filtered visible light spectrums. Different pigments and materials respond differently to these wavelengths, revealing layers that are invisible under normal viewing conditions. When Dr. Graves applied infrared imaging to the photograph, the girl's face transformed. Under normal light, her skin appeared pale but natural, consistent with Victorian photographic exposure and the fair complexion common in New England families of the era. Under infrared light, her face showed extensive brush marks, areas where paint had been carefully applied directly to the photographic surface. Someone had physically painted over portions of this photograph, Dr. Graves said. Not decorative hand coloring, which was common in Victorian portraits. This was corrective retouching. Someone was hiding something. The painted areas were concentrated around the girl's mouth, nose, and the edges of her face near her hairline. Whoever did the retouching was skilled. The brush strokes were invisible under normal light, blending seamlessly with the photographic emulsion. But why would someone need to retouch a child's face so extensively? Dr. Graves enhanced the contrast further and zoomed in on the girl's lips and nostrils. Beneath the painted layer, faint blue-gray discoloration became visible, a subtle darkening around the mouth and nose that the retoucher had carefully covered. Dr. Graves's medical consultant, Dr. Paul Chen, examined the enhanced images. That discoloration pattern is consistent with cyanosis, Dr. Chen explained. A bluish discoloration caused by lack of oxygen in the blood. It appears around the lips, nose, fingernails, and extremities. What causes cyanosis? Dr. Graves asked. Many things. Respiratory illness, heart failure, hypothermia. Dr. Chen paused. Or death. Dr. Graves felt her pulse quicken. She returned to the photograph and examined other areas. The girl's hands, clasped by her brother, showed the same faint discoloration around the fingernails, also painted over, but visible under spectral analysis. Then Dr. Graves noticed something else. The vertical line she'd seen behind the girl's back wasn't a backdrop flaw. When she enhanced it further, it resolved into a distinct shape, a metal rod or pole extending upward behind the girl's spine, disappearing into the area where her dress's high collar covered her neck. It's a support structure, Dr. Graves said aloud, though she was alone in her office. They were holding her upright. She zoomed in on the girl's neck and shoulder area. Beneath the lace collar, faint compression marks were visible, shallow grooves in the skin consistent with something pressing against the body. Dr. Graves then examined the area behind the children more carefully. Under infrared imaging, a faint silhouette appeared in the background, a human figure standing directly behind the girl, draped in dark fabric that blended with the backdrop. Hidden mother photography, Dr. Graves whispered. It was a technique used in Victorian child portraits when subjects were too young or too restless to sit still during long exposures. An adult, usually the mother, would hold the child in position while draped in black fabric that rendered them invisible in the final photograph. But this girl wasn't restless. She wasn't moving at all. Dr. Graves returned to the front of the photograph and looked again at the boy's face, at the faint vertical streaks running from his eyes. She enhanced the contrast around his eyes specifically. The streaks weren't water damage. They were tear tracks. The boy had been crying when this photograph was taken, and suddenly, Dr. Graves understood what she was looking at. This wasn't a portrait of two siblings. It was a memorial photograph. The girl was already dead. Dr. Graves sat in her office staring at the restored image, her mind racing through implications. In the Victorian era, death was a constant presence in family life. Infant mortality rates in the 1880s ranged from 15 to 20%. Childhood diseases, scarlet fever, diphtheria, cholera, tuberculosis, killed swiftly and without mercy. Photography, still a relatively new technology, became a way for grieving families to preserve one final image of a deceased loved one. These post-mortem photographs, or memorial portraits, were common, though modern audiences find them disturbing. Photographers developed techniques to make the deceased appear lifelike, propping bodies in chairs, supporting them with hidden braces, positioning them with living family members, and sometimes painting open eyes onto closed eyelids or adding color to pale cheeks. The goal was to create an image that families could treasure, a final moment captured before burial. But this photograph was different from typical post-mortem portraits Dr. Graves had studied. Usually, memorial photographs were clearly identified as such. The deceased positioned alone, surrounded by flowers, or lying in a coffin. Families weren't trying to hide the fact of death. They were commemorating it. This photograph appeared deliberately designed to hide what it actually was. The extensive retouching, the concealment of the support structure, the removal of the assisting adult from the background. Someone had worked hard to make this look like a normal family portrait. Why? Dr. Graves returned to the physical photograph and examined the back more carefully under magnification. Faint pencil marks were visible in one corner, nearly erased by time and handling. She used enhanced lighting and digital enhancement to read them. Clara and Julian, April 1885. And below that, in different handwriting, barely visible, last together. Dr. Graves felt a chill. Last together wasn't a phrase you'd use for a routine portrait. It implied finality, separation, loss. She contacted the Boston City Archives and requested death records from April 1885 with the surname possibilities from the Mitchell Portrait Studio client logs. 3 days later, she received a response. A death certificate dated April 3, 1885. Name, Clara Elizabeth Langford. Age, 4 years, 2 months. Cause of death, scarlet fever. Date of death, April 3, 1885. Parents, Robert and Margaret Langford. Boston. Attached to the death record was a burial record from Mount Auburn Cemetery, showing Clara was interred on April 5, 1885. Dr. Graves cross-referenced the date with the Mitchell Portrait Studio ledgers, which the Boston Historical Society had digitized years earlier. On April 4, 1885, one day after Clara's death, one day before her burial, the studio recorded a session. Memorial sitting, Langford children, 2 exposures, $3. The photograph had been taken the day after Clara died. Her body was brought to the portrait studio, dressed in her finest white dress, likely the dress she would be buried in, propped upright with metal supports, positioned beside her living brother Julian, and photographed. The boy, 7-year-old Julian, had sat beside his dead sister, holding her hand, while a photographer took their portrait. The tear tracks on his face weren't from sadness at sitting still for a long exposure. They were from grief. He was saying goodbye. And someone, likely the photographer or the parents, had carefully painted over every sign of death, transforming a memorial photograph into something that looked like an innocent sibling portrait. For 138 years, the deception had worked, until digital restoration revealed the truth hiding beneath the paint. Dr. Graves became obsessed with finding out what happened to Julian Langford, the living boy in the photograph. Through genealogical databases and census records, she traced his life. Julian Robert Langford. Born November 12, 1877, Boston, Massachusetts. Died March 3, 1956, Boston, Massachusetts, age 78. Julian had lived a long life, surviving into the mid-20th century, through both world wars, the Great Depression, and into the era of television and atomic energy. Census records showed he never married. He lived with his parents until their deaths in the early 1920s, then lived alone in the same Boston neighborhood where he'd grown up. His occupation was listed consistently across decades. Schoolteacher. Dr. Graves found a brief obituary from the Boston Globe, March 1956. Julian R. Langford, 78, retired elementary school teacher, died peacefully at home. He was a beloved educator known for his patience with struggling students. He never married and had no children. He is survived by several cousins. Private burial at Mount Auburn Cemetery. Mount Auburn Cemetery. The same cemetery where his sister Clara was buried 71 years earlier. Dr. Graves requested burial records. Julian was interred in the Langford family plot, next to his parents, and next to a small grave marked simply, Clara, beloved daughter, 1881 to 1885. But the most striking discovery came when Dr. Graves contacted the Boston Public Schools archives, looking for any photographs or records of Julian during his teaching career. A school yearbook from 1938, when Julian was 61 years old and nearing retirement, included a brief profile. Mr. Langford has taught at Adams Elementary for 37 years. He is known for his kindness, especially to children who have lost family members. He understands grief in ways most adults forget. Attached to the archive file was a small black and white photograph of Julian as an elderly man, sitting at a school desk, surrounded by students. On the wall behind him, barely visible in the photograph, was a framed portrait. Dr. Graves enhanced the image. It was the 1885 photograph of Julian and Clara. Julian had kept that photograph on his classroom wall for decades. The photograph of him at age 7 holding his dead sister's hand, tears on his face saying goodbye. The photograph that had been carefully retouched to hide death, to make it look like a normal, happy portrait. Julian had displayed it publicly, and no one had ever known what they were actually looking at. Dr. Graves felt tears in her own eyes. Julian had carried his sister with him his entire life, through childhood, adulthood, his career teaching other people's children. He had never married, never had his own family, but he had spent his life helping children, especially those grieving. He understood grief in ways most adults forget. Because he had experienced it at age 7, sitting beside his sister's body, holding her hand one last time, while a photographer captured the moment. And then he had lived with that photograph and that grief for 71 more years. When he died in 1956, he was buried next to Clara. After 71 years apart, the siblings who had posed together one final time in April 1885 were together again. Dr. Graves realized this wasn't just a story about a photograph. It was a story about love that lasted a lifetime. Dr. Graves organized an exhibition at the Boston Museum of Vernacular Photography titled Hidden Grief, Victorian Memorial Photography and the Art of Concealment. The centerpiece was the restored photograph of Clara and Julian Langford, displayed alongside the spectral imaging analysis showing the hidden retouching, the support structures, and the concealed adult figure in the background. The exhibition included historical context about Victorian post-mortem photography, scarlet fever mortality rates in the 1880s, and the cultural practices around grief and memorialization. But Dr. Graves also included Julian's story, the census records, the obituary, the school photograph showing the portrait on his classroom wall, and the burial records showing he was laid to rest beside his sister after 71 years. The exhibition opened in September 2023 and drew unexpected crowds. Many visitors were initially disturbed. Some parents covered their children's eyes, uncomfortable with the idea of photographing the dead. But others stayed for a long time, reading Julian's story, looking at his elderly photograph with the portrait visible behind him, understanding what it meant to carry grief for a lifetime. One visitor wrote in the museum's comment book, "I thought this would be creepy. Instead, it's the most beautiful thing I've seen. He never forgot her. He loved her his whole life." The photograph went viral online, sparking intense discussion about Victorian mourning practices, childhood mortality, and how different cultures process death. Some criticized the parents for posing Julian with his dead sister, calling it traumatic or cruel. But historians pushed back, explaining that Victorian families viewed these photographs as acts of love, final moments of togetherness before permanent separation. They didn't have videos, voice recordings, or casual snapshots, Dr. Graves explained in interviews. This photograph was the only way Julian's parents could preserve an image of their children together. After Clara's death, Julian would be an only child. This was the last moment they existed as siblings. Through genealogical researchers, Dr. Graves located a living descendant, Julian's great-great-niece, Anne Langford, age 76, living in Vermont. Anne had heard family stories about Uncle Julian, the teacher who never married, but she had never known about Clara. Family history said Julian had a sister who died young, but no one talked about it, Anne said. Seeing this photograph, seeing him as a child, holding her hand, crying, it explains so much about who he became. Anne donated Julian's personal papers to the museum, including a small leather diary he kept as a young teacher in 1901. One entry, dated April 3, 1901, the 16th anniversary of Clara's death, read, "I am 23 today, and Clara would have been 20. I think of her every day. I teach children her age now. I try to be patient, kind, gentle, the way I wish someone had been with me when she died. Grief never leaves. You just learn to carry it with love instead of pain." The museum added this diary entry to the exhibition, positioned beside the photograph. The final display text read, "This photograph captured two children, one dead, one living. But in a deeper sense, it captured what endures beyond death, the love between siblings, the weight of loss, and the choice to carry grief with tenderness." Julian Langford held his sister's hand in April 1885. In every meaningful way, he never let go. Victorian families didn't photograph death because they were morbid. They photographed it because love demanded preservation. And sometimes, that love lasted a lifetime, and beyond.